Hello, and welcome to the Screen Composer Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. Andrew Lockington is known for the epic scale of the blockbuster films he's worked on, as well as the incredible lengths he goes to capture his sounds. Things like venturing into the deepest jungle or risking injury and death to dismantle a piano. But make no mistake, these sonic explorations are matched by his beautiful and evocative orchestral writing. And when you add all this to his humble, curious, and down-to-earth nature, it quickly becomes obvious as to why he's one of the top composers working in Hollywood. We explore all of these facets and more in this wonderful conversation, including how he got his start assisting Mychael Danna, his fascinating career trajectory and how he went all in to get his first big break, how he has found success with a diverse range of collaborators and projects, and how he thinks about sound and finds new perspectives that are the drivers of his work and growth as an artist. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. And now, please enjoy this wonderful musical trek with Andrew Lockington. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you today. I wanted to start in a kind of a different place than I normally do. I want to ask you, what was a moment recently where you sort of were in a situation where you looked around and you went, oh my God, look how far I've come, or look at how amazing what's going on right now is?
Well, that's a funny thing to think about, because I'd say more often than not, I don't think that way. I kind of think, oh, this is what I would like to be doing, and looking ahead more than that. But when I do, I think there's a part of me that always thinks how lucky I am to be able to do something I love for a living, and actually get paid to do it. I mean, I think pretty much everybody doing this would be doing it whether they were getting paid or not. Right. And there was a director I worked for years ago who said, you know, he feels like he's having a party in his bedroom and he's waiting for the parents to come in and break up the party, because it does feel like that. Like, and not to say there aren't really tough times and really tough days, but yeah, I feel really fortunate. I pinch myself regularly that I get to do this, but I don't think you ever reach a point where you think, wow, I've made it this far. I think you're always trying to keep making a living and keep getting hired and keep doing things that inspire you.
So if you're looking back at your career starting out, when you're working on things that aren't on the scale of what you tend to be working on now, is it just kind of like an adaptation to the circumstances? Do you feel like you're just going, well, this is the same thing that I was doing back then. I'm just doing it in a different space and a different level, but the concerns are the same. The feelings are generally the same. Is that where it's at for you?
100%. I mean, when if people say, what's it like working on a studio film versus an indie film, they're all the same. It's the same challenges. You're dealing with the same different opinions, schedules, budget is always an issue, whether you have, $1 million or you have $10,000. It's always not enough, or there's always a limitation or a creative solution that is needed because of that. So they're all really similar. And I'm sure, as you found, sometimes you do something smaller that's a favor, or you do something for free and you think, okay, great, this is going to be really easy. I'm not going to get notes. I'm not going to have any input. And the opposite thing happens,
Yeah.
So really it's all really the same thing. And I don't think there's other than, even the politics, really, I think the skills you learn working on, when I did student projects and indie projects, and still do both of those, but the skills you learn in those are easily applied to all the different budget levels of projects.
Do you feel that, if you're thinking back on the moment when you sort of went, this is what I want to do. I want to be a film composer. And you saw yourself sort of, we all have these sort of imaginations when we're young about what that's going to look and feel like. Has that changed? Like, did you have a sense of what it would feel like when you got there? And did that change when you were finally there? Or were you always sort of fairly level-headed about it? It's like, it's more about the work, just continue doing that.
That's a good question. I think what got me into film music, I always loved music. I was always writing songs. I was always in bands. What drew me to film music was probably that it felt like a more honest, emotional tool in terms of expressing my emotions, orchestral, piano, stuff, like being able to, they talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. Well, I think the right music can say something that words and language can't say at all. And I was always really drawn to that, and the ability to express myself that way, and also to pick up on, to get messages from other musicians in that way. So that's what drew me to that. And with any job, as you get into something as a vocation that started as a passion, you have days where it's hard to get up, it's hard to go to work, it's hard to remember what drew you to that, and to see a reflection of your childhood dream in what you're doing in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I found, and I think it's true of a lot of artists I've talked to, you end up with these projects that kind of completely throw you back. Suddenly you're that 6 or 7-year-old kid sitting, watching E.T. or Star Wars or, Indiana Jones, or a movie that influenced you and moved you, and you suddenly go, oh wow, I'm doing something like this. And I'm not talking about the scale of the project, I'm talking about something that you can see from the other side, as a creator and not an audience member, that it has emotional impact and can be moving.
I always feel my favorite part of the actual process of making the score is that moment when you discover that magical sort of friction between picture and sound, and you go, this is it. Now they're speaking the language and they're saying something new. Trevor Morris said the greatest thing. He says it's 1 + 1 = 3. You get this sort of like the product is bigger than the two components that are making it up. And I think that's where I sort of feel like you do. That's a moment when you're like, oh, this is what it's about.
Well, I've had projects like this, but I've also had very specific moments. I did a film years ago, and we were really lucky to have Gord Downie come in and sing a song for us on the score with an orchestra, with 2-picture. I was a massive fan. I remember thinking, I can be totally cool. I'm going to be fine when I meet him. It's all going to be good. I'd met him earlier, but at this point I was a huge fan. And he walked in the room, and I just kind of spills, oh man, you're amazing. I just love you. Just instantly become that fanboy. But I remember him doing it was a cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Mm-hmm. I'd orchestrated it with orchestra. We started it with guitar and then orchestra. And he did 3 takes, and they were really good. And then on the 4th take, we thought, you know what, let's show him the scene again. He'd seen it, but let's show him the scene and have him sing along and see picture. And we put a big screen right in front of him. And I remember one of the engineers was like, oh, that's going to ruin the sound. You're going to get, the plasma screen is going to bounce back the acoustics into the mic. And it's like, it's okay. We'll live with that. Let's just, So he sang it. And as he was singing it, he started to get emotional, because it's a really moving scene, and his voice started to crack. But he pushed, almost like somebody giving a eulogy where they're about to lose their composure, but they push through it. Yeah. And he did that in singing. And we were all in the control room, me, the director, the producers, and we were crying. Like, we were literally emotionally crying. And it was one of those moments where you take the sum of all the parts, and they don't even come close to equaling what happened. And you can't it's magic. You can't put your finger on why it happened. You can line up all of the variables and have everything ready for the magic to happen, but there are things that just, I still hear that and get emotional when I hear it. And it's, so I've had those moments. I've had takes with a group of musicians or with an orchestra where I don't know why it's special, but you just go, wow, as they're playing it. So to me, it's trying to string those moments together. I mean, I'm sure Trevor said the same thing. You're trying to string those moments together because they're the motivation to keep going and to keep finding those things that are a direct link to why you wanted to do this as a kid.
Right. Wow. What a story. That's amazing. What an incredible privilege you had to get to work with Gord on something like that.
Yeah, it was very humbling. And I think, it's funny, I've heard from one of his friends that he remembers that quite well and had a similar experience. So, you sit there and you think, oh, this is every day for Gord.
Yeah.
But I've since learned that he also looked upon that pretty fondly.
Oh, that's beautiful. So in the movie of your life, if I was to direct it, I think the opening scene would be, it would come up on your childhood home and start pushing in. And as we come into the main living space, an excited young Andrew runs in to a space on the wall and looks confused and calls to his mom, "Mom, where's the piano?" Your mom was moving the piano all the time. What's the story about that? And how does that tie in with the rest of your childhood, that you were sort of, what your musical youth was like?
Yeah, that's funny. I hadn't thought about that in a while. My mother was really, she could have been an interior designer. She loved to move the furniture around. And as part of that furniture in the living room was the piano, which would find a different home every, I don't know, I'm probably imagining it more often than it was, but I think of it every 5 or 6 months. It would be on a different wall in a different space. And that did two things. One, it changed the acoustics of what you were playing. Like, you're instantly like, wow, this sounds different. And somehow it always sounded better. And maybe it was just a new timbre to the piano that I was hearing. But it also gave me a different window, but a different perspective of the room. And it made me realize new ideas would come with that, both the new sound of the piano and looking out a different window. And I guess I realized later in life that film is so much like that. Film is, trying to use a different instrumentation each time, really looking through a different lens, at a different story, at different characters. So that was, maybe that was the beginning of that whole addiction I had with trying to express the world I was seeing and the world I was feeling through music.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be a through line with you, because I feel like, and we'll get into this later, but the extraordinary lengths you go to collect sounds and to manipulate sounds. And, on the one side, you're a fantastic orchestrator and you have a command of that kind of music. And then on the other side, you're really fascinated with the sonic textures and the sonic worlds. And I feel like that's that sort of same idea of moving the piano. You're like, what thing can I change in my environment or in the sonic world that I'm living in right now that's going to give me those ideas?
Yeah, to me, it harkens back to picking up a new instrument. Like when I got a guitar for the first time after playing piano forever, I didn't know how to play it. And I kind of picked it up. And here you have this instrumental tool. You don't have the guidebook. And even if you did, I don't know what you're like with synths, but I never read those manuals.
No one does.
I'm calling Neil Parfit saying, how do you turn it on? Like, how do you do, like, but part of, for me, I mean, I'm like this with everything now, but it's the discovery of trying to figure out how to make music using your experience, now be given a whole different set of tools, whether that's a different instrument, a different mode, a different, any kind of rules, stochastic rules, anything that will sort of force your brain to not go to the path of least resistance and find a way to create music in a different way.
Oh, that's interesting. I really like that idea, to resist the path of, or to not go the path of least resistance. I sometimes wonder myself, and then other times I'm questioned externally, why are you doing it this way? Like, isn't there an easier way? Mm-hmm. And, part of it is, well, this is the concept and I want to chase it to see where it goes. But that's actually part of it too, is I think I am trying to create situations where I'm feeling a little bit like I'm in the deep end of the pool. And I'm waiting for those surprises and shocks to happen that will sort of like stimulate something. That's really cool. I'm going to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think for me anyways, it's often less about the timbre of the instruments and the final product. Like there was a short story once about stone soup, about this traveling man who brings a stone into the town, and no one wants to share their food, but they're all willing to contribute something to the soup, this magic soup he's made of stone. And then at the end, he pulls the stone out of the soup and says, actually, the flavors come out of the stone already. We don't need it. The townspeople all enjoy the soup and can't believe he's made it from this stone soup.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're talking about, to me, it's a catalyst to get your brain to think of something a different way. And it doesn't necessarily have to exist in the final product, but it's sort of forced you into a completely different avenue. And I worked on a film that I had recorded some drumming in Papua New Guinea, a film called Journey to the Mysterious Island, and we had the orchestra in London playing these cues. And what amazed me is that I realized after my orchestration of what would have been sort of an adventure like score, and still is, but the way I'd orchestrated and written for orchestra had been so influenced by the different keys and the different time signatures that I had experienced researching the drumming, that in the end a bunch of those cues didn't have any of those elements in it, but I had thought of the orchestra, even the tuning of the orchestra, in such a different way. So yeah, to me, a lot of times the timbres and the instruments and kind of playing with a new idea give a new texture, a new sound. It takes you away from piano, string, any of the Western instruments we grew up with. But more interestingly, if it can change the way you think of those and the grid in which you write them on, I think that's where the interesting stuff happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's really interesting. So as you're growing up, you were playing in bands. I read that you faked your way into a band audition at 15.
Yeah. I was I didn't lie, but I was very elusive about my age. And I borrowed it might have been my mom's suit jacket that had shoulder pads in it. I thought it would make me look much older than 15, but I'm not sure how successful it was.
And what was your sense of that realm? Was it, because you say that it wasn't really for you, was that something you came to later on? Did you have a strong ambition starting out that you wanted to play in bands, or was it just one avenue of musical expression?
No, that was absolutely the dream. That's what I wanted to do in high school. And the band that I joined, they were all in their late 20s. I was 15. It's funny. So I auditioned, and it went really well. And then they're like, "Dude, you're 15. Like, this isn't going to work out." So about three weeks later, there's a knock on the door on like a Thursday afternoon after school. And it's the bass player, leader of the band. And he's like, "So, keyboard player we hired quit, or something happened with him that he didn't work out." And he said, "We have a gig. We're playing up, I can't remember where it was. It was out of the city, 3 nights at a club. And here's 2 mixtapes. I had like 180 minutes of songs I had to try to learn by Friday night to do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday." So that was kind of my initiation, and it went great. And yeah, that was kind of my high school years, was playing in the band with these guys and doing school as much as I could. So yeah, and I guess, so when I say it wasn't for me, I think what I realized, and it's funny, I had a friend later in life who was in a very successful band, and I went. The plan was to go on tour with them for a week and be on the bus and hang out with them, and met up with them in Seattle for the first night of their playing. And I realized there's an hour and a half a night that is ecstasy. Like, they're on stage for 2,500 people, yeah, and it's amazing. And then there's 22 and a half hours of sleeping on a bus, of, miserable meals, miserable hotel rooms. I realized I didn't even last the week. It was the one night, and I'm like, I got to go home. Like, this is
wow.
So I think I realized more at that point than when I was younger that, oh yeah, no, this isn't, that I wouldn't have lasted in that world.
Well, a good thing you pulled out that early. I mean, you could have really been stuck in it for a while and, done all the things that most people do, like do some drugs, go down a bad path, get a dangerous girlfriend, and, then maybe I should back off of this.
Well, I'm still so envious. Come on, you go to a concert, you see people get on stage, and so envious. Like, I went and saw Ed Sheeran at the Rogers Center Is it still called that? It changes name so often.
Oh, I think it's the Scotiabank something or other now.
Oh, is it really?
I don't know. I think it is. But
and here's one guy with an acoustic guitar in front of 50,000 people.
Yeah,
the dude's talent. Like, I was blown away. And it's just one guy. Like, just he didn't have backup. Anyone, just him. And I can just imagine the rush he has.
Oh God.
Doing that. Like, so I'm still extremely envious of it. I don't think I was talented enough or built for it.
Yeah, I think you really are living for those moments. For me, as a teenager who was a total metalhead, it was watching like Metallica or Judas Priest or Iron Maiden play in Rio, because Rio was always the crowds that you just went on like a sea of people forever, and they're all moving as one organism, and you're like, wow, just to have command of that many souls for 2 or 3 hours, that would be incredible. But yeah, the grind on the outside of that is pretty extraordinary. So you ended up at Wilfrid Laurier. And you mentioned that you learned the most from singing in the choir.
Yeah, certainly in terms of, no disrespect to my composition professors, but in terms of voice leading and really the epiphany that you can have chords that exist of 4 separate parts that are each singing a melody that cumulatively can be heard as chords, or you can hear it as these voices interwoven. And that was a real epiphany for me, and it really changed the way I wrote from that point on. So yeah, I studied orchestration and composition at Wilfrid Laurier. I'm always clear I didn't graduate. I'm like a credit or 2 short, and fingers crossed one of these days I'll pick up.
It's really had a negative impact on your career, that's for sure.
Well, it definitely meant I didn't have anything to fall back on. So if it made me work a bit harder, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot there.
So based on that, do you think of music vertically as in stacks, or do you think of it horizontally as in melody, or both?
Yeah, no, I think of it as in, like, as I'm orchestrating or even just writing like a 5-part or a 4-part movement, I'm trying to make sure that each part, as if they're a singing section, it has a melody, that they're not just all sitting on middle C, or they're all, that they're not just there to service the other 3 parts, that they're that if at any point they were played on their own, it would be its own theme, and it would hold up that way.
All right. How did you end up working with Mychael? And then in this case, I'm talking about Mychael Danna, of course.
Yeah, gosh, super lucky. So I had been doing ads and jingles and that kind of thing, not working for a house, but sort of freelance, filling in and kind of doing spillover work. And I had met with Mychael, and I met with his brother Jeff Danna in LA, who later I spent a lot of time working with, and that was amazing as well. But most of the stuff I was doing at the time was orchestral, and Mychael was sort of saying, there's not a lot of orchestral in Toronto. You should really think about going to LA. That's where you're going to, that world and those budgets, and that's maybe more a better fishbowl for you to be in with your skill set.
Right. What year would that have been?
98 maybe, or 97.
Okay. Right. So you were doing the jingle stuff in Toronto at that time, and then you were talking to Mychael and Jeff, and Mychael said you should go to LA.
Yeah, he said go to LA. You should meet my brother Jeff, and so I did that. Met a bunch of people. Kind of did a 2-week trip in LA, and thought, I should be here. Get ready, load the car up, give up your lease, and get the dog in the car scrounge up the little money you have, and be one of those stories of people getting in a car and driving across the country. The car at the time, I'm not sure would have made it across the country, but so that was the plan. And literally the day before I was thinking this is my plan, Mychael called and said, "Hey, I've got a couple projects. Are you interested in helping me out?" And the rest was history. It was the beginning of 5 or 6 years of working with him, initially full time, and then kind of over the years. He was amazing about kind of letting me go, and if I had an opportunity, go work on my own thing for a bit and come back. And as good as my education was at Laurier, working with Mychael a multitude of music degrees.
What kind of things were you working with him on, or what were your jobs, and what were some of the biggest lessons you took away from that?
Oh, it's hard to compartmentalize, kind of break it up. I learned a lot about theme writing. I learned a lot about how hard it is, like how everybody goes through this moment where you're not you're faced with a hill to climb, and you have to figure your way through it. And I guess there was a part of me at the time that thought, oh, a great composer like Mychael must walk in and know exactly what he's going to do and not have any anxiety. And not that he had anxiety, but there was he was like everybody else, where you're kind of, he used to say it's like being in the trenches. You got to kind of fight your way out of the trenches until you figure out your way through. And every project is like that. So that was really valuable. And in terms of what I was doing for him, it was started out kind of as everything. There were a couple of projects, some projects that I orchestrated and even conducted some things for him, but mostly it was, some tech support, arranging, kind of, I would go to sessions and kind of be his right-hand guy on the sessions and kind of reading scores, and he was sort of jack of all trades. We did co-compose a few projects, which was really helpful, but most of it wasn't that. So yeah, and I, even in the orchestrating stuff, and I enjoy that part of my job, but through Mychael, I met Nicholas Dodd, who I've worked with since on many of the projects I've done, who's just a master orchestrator, a master conductor. So I was very quickly put in my place in that regard.
Yeah, Nicholas is a legend for sure. So what was the sort of point for you where you felt that you were able to sort of take flight on your own? Was it a gradual process, or were you kind of thrown into one project where it was just like, okay, now's the tipping point, I have to abandon other work that I'm doing and just focus on this solely?
I liken it to when you are driving somewhere that you regularly go, and you leave the house, you pull out of the driveway, and then you suddenly realize you're there. And in that 20 minutes of time, you don't remember the left turns, the right turns, the lane changes. You just were kind of on autopilot. And I think that's that kind of repetition of task is what I learned with Mychael. And I do remember I was working on a film with Nicholas was conducting it in London, and it was probably my first big orchestral thing on my own. And I remember Nicholas saying to me, wow, are you scared? Like we have a downbeat in 10 minutes. Like this is 8 days of this is a big deal. Like, are you? And I thought, wow, I've done this. Like, even though I hadn't been me, I'd been in this situation so many times with Mychael. It didn't really overwhelm me. It was almost on autopilot at that point. Now, once he mentioned it, I was terrified. But until then, I was like, oh no, I got this. Like it's like, riding a bike, which is the overused example, but it was very much just sort of, I know the process, I'm comfortable, I can kind of figure this out.
That's kind of funny that you did get the fear once you mentioned it. It's sort of Wile E. Coyote looking down after having been walking on air for a few moments.
Yeah, exactly.
We were before we started recording, we were talking about this idea of sort of autonomic physiological responses to fear and how odd some of those are, and not really necessarily useful in all cases. Are there moments where you still face that kind of challenge of fear, and how do you handle it?
Oh man, all the time. I mean, and in some ways, if people don't have that, I think the anxiety is both failure and being better. Like, I think as someone working in the creative world, you can't plateau. You are always striving to top what you've done, or be worthy of your fellow people in the industry. And so you're always trying to be better. And I think that's an anxiety and a fear that we all feel. And also a justification for why we've chosen this. It's not the easiest job. I remember my father worked in the steel industry at a steel mill, and his whole life, every paycheck he's ever had has come from that company.
Wow.
And I realized that, I'm interviewing for a job 5-6 times a year, and then the job's ending and you're moving on to another job. Like, it's literally like entering a new workforce where you have to, use your people skills to meet new people, learn how to get along with them, accomplish a task, wave goodbye, and hopefully you see them again on another project. But it's so yeah, I mean, if you're not in this industry and you imagine the anxiety of starting a new job and switching jobs that many times a year, I mean, that goes along with very much with what we do, and I guess a lot of people in the entertainment industry. But I guess it's something that doesn't go away, but you get used to it. You kind of you learn to embrace it as part of any anxiety you have. Like, listen, when you write music and you play it for a director or a studio at the first time, you've I guess it's like an audition. Like, you're going in and you have no idea what their reaction will be. You
right.
Pray it will be good, but yeah, you better believe there's anxiety there, because it could be the difference between staying up all night for the next 2 months or having a 9 to 5 Monday to Saturday schedule for the next few months. So yeah, so to answer your question, I'm not sure I think if you get used to it, maybe you're not pushing the envelope anymore.
Right.
But it is definitely something that you learn to cope with.
Going to one of the, sort of first really big studio films that you worked on, which was Journey to the Center of the Earth 1. How did you end up there? It's kind of an interesting story in terms of your arc, because it sort of does this amazing jump, and there were sort of some twists and turns along the road. I wonder if you could sort of take us through that.
Yeah, it's a little bit like tracing back your lineage of your life, right? When you look at all the projects and how they came to be, and every different project seems to come about in a different way. You get hired in some different manner. Journey 1 was, I guess I'd worked on a small indie film that I was really proud of, and was on an Air Canada flight of somebody who was filming a horror film in Toronto. And this LA director was flying up, and as he's flying up, he turns on this movie and hears my score and thinks, wow, this family film about a 12-year-old kid running Boston Marathon, this guy would be great to write this horror flick, gore film. And so he called me about it, and I thought, I don't know why or how he's imagining that I'm appropriate for this. But I went to the interview, and, in classic fashion, one of those films where you think, I don't know that I really want this. And the interview goes the best it ever could have. And I really liked them, actually, the filmmakers. But, driving home, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to get it. It's all good. My agent calls and says, you got it. And literally driving home from the interview, which had never happened and has never happened since. So I do that film. And then from that, somebody hears that score and thinks of me for this film. And I went in, I remember being in LA, meeting with Lindsay Fellows, music supervisor. And he said, okay, we're going to set it up. I think you'd be great for this. You're going to go in, you're going to meet with the director, and Eric Brevig, director. And I went in and I met with him, and I did not, all this anticipation, all this build-up, I just didn't have the best meeting. It was one of those meetings where I didn't really get a chance to say what I wanted to say, and it just didn't flow comfortably. And I thought, oh, here we go. So we're leaving the meeting, and Lindsay and I are walking out of the room, and we're in the parking lot, and he's like, well, okay, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And I just said to him, in a stroke of acting, I guess, but I felt fairly confident I could do a good job on the film, but I just said, dude, I promise you I will knock this out of the park for you. And he just looked at me and he said, okay, give me a minute. And he went back in and he sat down with the director and the producer without me, came back out like an hour and 10 minutes later and said, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. So, and it was just like, oh, wow, like that. There was something in that moment where I thought, okay, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down swinging here.
Yeah.
And and that, yeah, that ended up being a big turning point. Doing that film gave me a lot of opportunities from that. So, incidentally, that whole instinct of when you feel you're going down, speak up, doesn't always work. I've learned the other way around. So don't use it as a blanket recommendation in life, because I don't recommend it. But in that instance, it worked out really well.
Okay, I got to tug on that thread a little bit, because something I find very fascinating is the intersection, or being able to tell the difference between instinct and fear. For me, instinct is something that your body and your mind does subconsciously to say this is actually dangerous, and fear is usually irrational, based on, some sort of like, I'll fail, or this will put me in a bad social situation. And oftentimes fear is something that should be ignored, whereas instinct should be followed. Do you have a sense of, if you go from like, I had a gut sense, which I would call instinct, or the good instinct in this case, to speak up at that moment, can you parse like the difference in feeling between those two moments, like when it worked and when it didn't?
Certainly I can in hindsight, but certainly in the moment, I don't think it's as easy to tell the difference.
Sure. Yeah.
I worked on a film called The Space Between Us, and there's a line in that film where the reporters are asking these astronauts that are going to Mars, are you scared? And this astronaut she says, yes, I'm terrified, but I'm going anyways. And courage is when you're scared and you go anyways. Yeah. And you do it anyways, which has resonated with me ever since, because it kind of makes me think, and in that sense, I think it's hard to differentiate between fear and instinct. And maybe both can happen simultaneously. Yeah. But yeah, certainly. But it's interesting. I think in that case, my fear was that I'm going to leave LA and not not had a chance to say what I want to say. So I think I thought of in one sentence what I had really tried to say in the 45 minutes in the interview and not been able to do it. But
because I guess there's a difference between saying something like that and coming off as desperate, and saying something like that and coming off as confident and just sort of like going, let me just make this perfectly clear in case it was missed.
Yeah, and by the way, to this day, I don't know whether he viewed it as me being desperate or confident. Sure, but somehow he gave it. The other interesting thing is, and someone, I've learned this later on in life, that whether you believe it at the time or not kind of doesn't matter. What matters is, can you back it up? Yeah. And there was an actor friend of mine, and she was trying it for different parts, and she got a part, and she knew one of the producers, and she said, do you think I got this because the producer knows me, or do you think I deserve the role? Right. And I kind of thought, we talked about it, and I thought, whether you deserve the role will be decided by the people seeing. So your job is actually to prove that you earned it. And in reality, and maybe this is like this in life, but everything is, everyone has benefited from knowing people and your connections. That's an important part of the industry that really they don't teach in school, that how important it is to have social skills and learn how to communicate with people and be easy to work with and have a creative signature, but also be open to interpreting other people's. And so anyway, I think it's definitely fear, but I think the goal, I recognized at the time, the thing is I have to make sure this guy isn't embarrassed that he took me at my word.
Right. Do you feel that you're good in a room, or rather that you can read a room well and understand sort of what the tenor and the direction should be and adapt to that in the moment?
That's it. So that's interesting, because I am getting better at it, and I think I'm pretty good at it. The hard part is, and this is what to me differentiates the people in the industry that I love to work with, and the people that I think get a bit lost. I think that I can tell in a room sometimes that my ideas are not necessarily the popular ideas, that it's not something somebody's thought of before musically, and I can see the path of least resistance that I could and sometimes should take, and just, okay, abandon that, just do what they want you to do, and you'll be fine, and everyone will be happy. But I also recognize that the danger of that is mediocrity. And a lot of, not a lot, there are people in the industry who are surviving by being average, and they're capable of being more. And when I say this, I think a lot of times it's executives or people, but maybe it's the whole world. There are people that could stick their neck out and could be recognized, but the risk of sticking your neck out is actually being eliminated from the equation as well. So in terms of reading a room, more often than not, it's pretty easy to kind of feel what people want and what they're liking and what they aren't liking. And certainly you want to pivot and incorporate that, but it's also really important to not read it to such an extent that you are abandoning, what you think is a really good creative direction. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a lot of times trying to find not a compromise, but a way of incorporating both ideas and going to a third destination that you're both equally as happy with, or in best case scenarios, it's better than either of you could have come up with on your own.
Right. That's great. I love that. So you were talking about Journey to the Center of the Earth 2, and the hunt for this Polynesian sound, which came from director, or was the director's wish. I should say before we go any further too, that those two scores are absolutely, incredible works of orchestral prowess, and just absolutely beautiful in every way. And some of my favorite themes that are living on my Spotify playlist come from those two. So it's just wonderful, wonderful work. But thanks. You really went to, I would say, without being Tweed, you went to the ends of the earth to get some of these sounds that are not of orchestral origin. And that story of your travels, who you met, and what ended up happening externally to the film is absolutely fascinating. I was hoping you could lead us through that.
Yeah. So Brad Payton, who I've since worked with, he's a great friend, and we've worked together on lots of films. And he's a real motivator for me in terms of always trying to step out of my box. He once said to me, I remember saying to him, hey, this is a bit out of my comfort zone, something he was asking me to do. And he said, well, everything's out of your comfort zone until you go there. And then it becomes your box, and your box gets bigger and bigger. I think about that a lot. But essentially, I'd done the first Journey film, and returning for the second were two producers, Josh Hutchison, one of the actors, and myself. And we were really the only team that came back for the second film based on scheduling, etc. So Brad hired me, and when he hired me, he said, look, this film takes place in an abandoned island in Melanesia, Polynesia. I really want the score to have an authentic element of that. And having worked with Mychael a long time and done a lot of research with him, and really studied the way he looks at scores, and he looks at being influenced by other cultural rules in their music, I thought, great, I'm all set for this. And I started looking into Polynesian music, and you realize, okay, there's ukuleles, there's slide guitars, there's all of these things that actually aren't authentic at all. They've all, right. They're authentic, but they've been influenced by the Western world.
Kind of like tomatoes in Italy.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, how do I do this? So I'd reached out to this guy, Irie Ingram, who's a drummer, composer, incredible musician, and he was based out of Melbourne at the time. And I was chatting with him, and just on email, and just saying, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. And he said, look, if you really want to do this, if you really want to understand the musical rules and the instruments before any of this, you have to go to where I'm from, Papua New Guinea. And I'd heard of Papua New Guinea. I knew where it was. I didn't know a lot about it. But he convinced me, hey, we're going to get a couple of guides, and we're just going to backpack and visit a couple of different tribes. And he set this whole thing up. And it was an adventure that was incredible. It definitely changed my life. It definitely influenced the score. And Yeah, it was amazing. Having kids now, and I mean, I did then too, but I'm not sure I would kind of put my life in that situation, in those just randomly backpacking and hitchhiking in the back of pickup trucks and not speaking any of the languages.
Was there a sense of kind of danger in those moments at times? Did you feel like, oh, I could catch something here or end up with like gangrene or something?
Yeah, I think more now than then. I mean, I was really excited by the adventure. I wasn't really worried at the time about my safety, and the people were amazing. Like it really changed my life in the way I think of the world. I think, this is a bigger conversation, but I think naively, I went into it thinking, I mean, recognizing how lucky we are and to be born where we are, and we're so fortunate and so privileged in the situation we're in. But I remember when I arrived in Papua New Guinea thinking, they want, they are not as fortunate as I am. And recognizing that, and I remember one of, he's still a friend, Lungal, saying to him, hey, you could do this, and we could get you gigs, and you could do this, and you could play drumming, this. And he's like, I love my life. I love my schedule. Like, I have everything I want. And to me, it was interesting because when you're there and you see remnants of missionaries and people trying to go in and change, and I don't know, it made me a bit ashamed, to be honest, and just think, what these people have has challenges the way our life has challenges, but
right.
The beautiful things it has, why would you ever, to have the arrogance of wanting to take that away from someone was really eye-opening, and it wasn't something I'd really thought of on that level until I was there. So I remember we were going up the river at one point and seeing this, in the middle of nowhere, this steel shack church, and just thinking,
wow,
it embarrassed me, to be honest, seeing it there and just thinking, wow, I'm saddened that someone came in and tried to change any of this. So.
And yet, I think one of the tribes, you mentioned this when we were speaking earlier, they had actually never seen a white person before. Yeah, and they were shocked by your appearance.
Yeah, they were. There were a couple of instances where, I mean, that was another very eye-opening thing, to be an absolute visual outcast in another society where you're just not. They're not used to seeing someone who looks like you.
Wow.
And it was anyway. Yeah, bigger conversation, but it was definitely. Changed my life in a lot of ways and has given me a very different perspective.
And these recordings that you made were not only for your purposes, the drumming sounds and the log drumming and all this stuff, but there was also languages and sounds and other sort of environmental things that you ended up being able to donate to a university when you came back.
Yeah, so it actually started a really cool thing in my life and career where when I did all these recordings, the idea was there were sessions like same as we did in London, same rate, everything, but in the midst I had these tons of batteries, tons of recorders, and was just recording languages, recording. I recorded when we got to when the warriors came out and met us in the dugout canoes. Like, we recorded as much as we could. Mm-hmm. And it what amazed me is, at the end of the trip, Port Moresby, the university there said, could you give these to us? Because some of these languages we don't have records of. And like, I think, at least at the time, Papua New Guinea had 1,200 languages. And these aren't dialects of different, they're not different kinds of English or different kinds of French or different, they're literally different languages that don't share words or structure. They were all very, very unique to the different tribes. So we're on one of the islands I was on. The island across the river spoke a completely different language. So it was really cool. So the music, the drumming, some of the ceremonies, everything, and the chiefs of the tribes were so thrilled at that idea too, of this being recorded somehow, because to this day, so much of their concern is preservation of culture and, literal survival, but also preservation of, because the culture, the art, everything is like all of us is based on passing down these traditions from our elders, and there's the fear that that won't be there. In fact, one of the tribes we were visiting, a few days before, there was an elder there who was the last survivor who knew a couple of these. They're sort of like ragas, so they're these rhythms that are 1,000 years old, that are part of the culture that a lot of their music is based on, and sadly he passed away like 2 days before we got there from malaria.
Oh, wow. And
it's gone. Like he hadn't yet taught it to the younger generation. So certainly I was very happy that it served multiple purposes. And ironically, it was like a year later, another professor contacted me and said, "Hey, I know this tribe, and it's the young kids have learned all of the stuff from their elders would you do the same thing? Would you come and you can use it, do a session, and you can use it in a film score, and then give us a copy of it, and we'll have it as a record for us too." And it's happened multiple times now, and it's been amazing. It's been really and a bigger purpose than the film it's for.
Right.
So it's been neat.
That's such a cool story. I just think that's so neat. What fascinates me most about that happening in the way that it was a completely unintended consequence, but it's such a beautiful thing in the end to have this, this work done that wouldn't have otherwise been done, that no one thought to do, and ended up becoming such a valuable thing for really all parties involved. I mean, it's really interesting to hear that they are conscious of this and that they understand, sort of, even though this is a foreign world to them in some ways, they understand the value of that, it's fascinating.
Well, it's funny because the flip side of that is one of the tribes I was at, they didn't have video. Obviously, the idea of video of, like, I had this little HD camcorder that Warner Brothers had given me to record sort of for B-roll stuff. And the day I got it, I have 3 daughters, and they were in ballet class. So I thought, I've got to learn how to use this. I'm going to go to ballet class. I'm going to film them dancing. So they're in their little pink tutus, like they're 4 and 6, I think. They were pretty young. So I'm going to record it, and I'll learn how to use it. So I get to Papua New Guinea, and I've recorded a bunch of stuff. And on this one tribe, the last night I was on their island, we all sat around and talked. And the warriors and the guides and myself. And you have to imagine there's like 4 levels of translation here. Like you have all these different translators. You have no idea how the communication is getting through, if it's completely intact by the time it gets one direction or the other. So we're sitting around talking, and one of them says, "Can you show us from your world? What does it look like? What's it like?" And the only thing I had was the ballet. My daughters
your only cultural
doing ballet.
artifact.
The only cultural thing I had, nothing else. So here I am showing this, and as I'm showing this, I'm imagining, on National Geographic in 10 years, there's tutus. In the jungle of Papua New Guinea, there's people wearing tutus because this is what they've seen, from.
Or that's what they think American Canada is.
Exactly.
North Americans primarily express themselves.
Exactly.
And this is their normal culture. This is what they wear on a daily basis. They go to work looking like this,
100%. So it's the other, it's funny. I don't think I've told this story, but one of the most amazing things that happened. So here we are on an island in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and we're all sitting around in these elevated huts, and you've seen them kind of in Indonesia, where they're built on stilts to get them off of the ground. Yep. And that's partly due to flooding, but it's largely due to predators like snakes and things like that, to eliminate the possibility of them coming in. So we're all sitting there late at night. There's no lights. So the only light is my recorder that I have in the room. The little LCD display is putting this orange glow into the hut. And we're all sitting around. We're drinking whatever the alcohol is that they've made, and we're just chatting. And it was amazing. It was one of those kind of moments. Imagine, when you're in college or university or high school and you're sitting around with all your friends outside on a summer night. It was like that. And I'm recording the whole thing. Just thought, the light's on, I'll just record the talking. So in the middle of nowhere, these warriors start singing the Japanese national anthem. And I have an uncle who's Japanese.
Wow.
And I know the anthem, and I'm like, what? And in Japanese, they're singing it. And I'm like, okay, what is going on here? So over the next half hour, I hear the story that in the Second World War, on their little island, the Japanese had set up a camp with an anti-aircraft artillery on the top of the hill. They're at the bottom of the hill. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese in the morning would do their morning exercises and sing their national anthem. And through the jungle, this tribe heard this song, and it had kind of adopted it as a piece of their culture, not at the time understanding the significance of it at all.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. I wonder what it meant to them, like what they thought it, or they just liked the sound of it, and or maybe it's like let's mark this moment of some significance to see these people on the beach doing these things and singing this song, to remember them. That's their song. We'll repeat it for them.
It's a good question, because they didn't think highly. Like the stories passed down were not kind of the occupation. I think they'd had some run-ins with them, and it wasn't a good result. So it's funny that ended up being a part of the culture, even with the negative connotation of their encampment.
Wow, we could talk about this kind of stuff for hours. It's so fascinating, but of course it's all conjecture and us sort of theorizing about this stuff. I am having these kind of funny imaginations. There's like 4 levels of interpretation in the broken telephone. You get to the last one and they say, well, this man has come all the way from across many miles. He wants to travel to the center of the earth, and he needs protective music because he's going to meet many creatures down there, and he's afraid.
Well, do you know what was cool? So you're going into these places where people don't go to movies. Like, it's they all knew who The Rock was. Not everywhere, but in a lot of Papua New Guinea, they're like, oh yeah, The Rock.
Oh,
Samoan. Oh yeah, because he's one of us. And it was, so there was like we recorded videos to Dwayne from people like, can we say hi to him? And yeah, Dwayne was amazing.
Oh, that's incredible. Wow. That's so cool. Wild.
The one other thing I'll tell you about the translation, just because it's funny. So we're on the Sepik River, and you have to imagine this big river that goes down to the ocean from the highlands, and it's maybe 2 football fields wide, and it's very, very muddy. Like, it looks like chocolate milk, the water. Like, it's very, very, and there's crocodiles, and huge crocodiles in this river, and these crocodiles eat people. Like, they literally eat people from the tribes. That's one of the things. Like, if you're standing near the river, don't put your back to the river, because they know if you're like, no, this is all like, so I'm with the warriors, the group that were sort of accompanying me and my translators, and they had all these things they would want me to participate in, and a lot of them were not things I was comfortable doing, but they said, okay, we're going to go to the river and bathe. Okay, I'll go do that. So we all go walk into the river, and we have to walk like 100 yards to get to a point where we're this high in the water to bathe. And so I'm maybe 20 meters into the river, walking towards the center. And I said to Irie, I said, aren't there crocodiles here? Haven't we seen crocodiles here? And Irie then translates it into another language, who translates it into another language, who translates it into Chambri. And so by now we're like 80 yards. Like, as this translation's happening, I'm getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And then it starts coming back, and it comes back. Finally it gets to me, and we're in the center, and we're all there, and it comes back, and it's like, he says they only come here to feed. And I'm like, oh my God.
Perfect.
So I've never bathed faster in my life.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's exactly the comforting thing that I wanted to hear. Thank you for that. Yeah. Oh, that's too funny. So speaking of The Rock, I wanted to talk a bit about what I would consider your most successful public service announcement, San Andreas. relatively unknown film. And I hear that it actually started to make you nervous for the first time about actual earthquakes, and you went out and quickly got yourself set up with an actual earthquake kit.
Oh yeah, when I was working with, often when I'm working on these films, I have a studio in LA and I'll move it around to a different house that I'll rent for a year and have a studio set up in it and live in it. I'm one of those people, I like to get up in the middle of the night if I have an idea and just go do it. So having a separate location for my studio from where I'm sleeping and living is not ideal.
Right.
So I was living in this house near Griffith Park, and I'm getting these early cuts of the film, and Paul Giamatti he's the scientist in the film, and he's saying, I'm watching this early cut, and he's like, a lot of people don't even realize that they're living right over a major fault line, and I'm like, huh. And I go on the computer and I type in my address, and literally the street I'm on, it was discovered like 8 years earlier, is a major fault line that they hadn't discovered previously. That and the article's all about how house values on that street have since gone down because people realize they're right at the intersection between two tectonic plates. It was pretty funny. Wow. So yes, I was very quick to go to Costco, and Costco, you walk in and there's an earthquake kit. So I was
that's some pretty good inspiration for the film you're working on. Like, I'm kind of living that fear right now.
100%. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the dying piano.
Yeah. So again, early cut of the film. It actually, I think it was an early previs on action movies. They often do this previs, and having daughters, I say it kind of looks like a Barbie movie where you've got this animated, drama of these scenes, usually action scenes. So, there was this scene where the Golden Gate Bridge is, the wires are snapping, and it's slowly going and going, and then it breaks. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder if the sound of breaking strings, wonder what that would sound like if we were to snap strings on a piano, and again, just kind of maybe get some sounds, make a contact out of it, or make some textures out of it, put it through some cool pedals, whatever. So Neil Parfit, who's someone I've worked with forever, a good friend of mine, and he's been on a lot of these big films with me, always at the sessions. He's fantastic. So I kind of said, Neil, hey, do you want to do this with me? We're going to get an old piano. It was free. I got it from one of the piano companies in Toronto, and I said, look, I want a piano. This is what I'm going to do to it. And they said, if you pay the $200 shipping, we'll give you a piano. We have tons of old pianos. So I get this piano. I set it up in my studio, and Neil and I very quickly think, okay, we're going to hit it with a sledgehammer. We're going to do this. So, and then we're gonna get a string and break a string on it with these wire cutters. I think at the time they were just little wire cutters. So we do that, and bam, and a piece of this piano flies across the room. So if this was a Ben Stiller movie, cut to us at Home Depot buying face guards, sledgehammer, big wire cutters so we can be 3 feet away from it when it's happening. It's funny, Neil said at the time, like, they didn't even ask what we were doing. Like, it looks like we're going to rob a bank, and they didn't even ask what we were doing. So we came back and we spent, the plan was over 2 days to just slowly kind of break this piano apart.
Yeah.
And I think he may have said this, but at the end of the first day, Neil'd gone home, and here I've got this piano that's sort of half dead, has certain strings cut, the piano board is warped on one side, it's just, it's halfway gone. And I sat down and just started playing it, and it wasn't like a normal piano. Only certain notes worked. Every once in a while the hammer hit the soundboard, or it hit a stray piece of wood, or you would hit a string, and one of the other strings that we'd cut had somehow woven its way through the strings. And I realized I called it the dying piano because it was a completely different instrument. And I sat there for 3 or 4 hours and just, again, it was that drive to work. It was you sit down, suddenly you come to, and you realize 4 hours have passed, and you've been playing for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And again, it's that same idea of this instrument that changes the way you think of music. And the limitations of it end up being inspiring to what you're doing.
There was sort of a restriction of how many notes you could actually use, and a sort of pre-built sandbox in a way that sort of like told you what it was going to be.
Yeah, and I think I had in the past found sounds and instruments, and then you put it in a contact and you go, oh, this instrument doesn't play an F sharp. I'm going to create an F sharp. And you quickly lose what's special about that instrument and what it's kind of trying to tell you. And I kind of think of it as finding the music within the limitations that it's given you, and try not to cheat it. Sometimes you have to cheat it, but try not to cheat it. It's a little bit like 12-tone. Like if you're writing in 12-tone series, you use that as an idea to come up with a melody that's maybe a little different than you would have before. You might break the rule every once in a while.
Right.
But it's the rule that sends you in that creative direction.
Oh, that's great. This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers. And now, back to our show. I don't remember in what context you said this, but you said the phrase something like the intimate within the epic. And in this film, you mentioned that your favorite musical moment is actually a total contrast to what Brad really wanted, which was the sound of destruction. And I think you recorded it at Abbey with a very special instrument.
Yeah, so there's a moment, it's interesting actually. There's a moment in the film where, I'm not going to spoil it now, it's 7 years old, but where Dwayne's daughter's dying, she's drowning, and Dwayne's still trying to save her. And Brad and I kind of talked about, there's two ways to score this. You can score him trying to save her, and we get to the point where he can't, and then the music will have to shift at that point. Or you make it almost as though the heavens are calling her in, and it's inevitable. And you score her slowly slipping away and almost saying, it's okay, Dad, it's okay. And that's what we ended up doing. And it was, a little bit like one of those Gord Downie moments. It was really powerful. And it was, when Dwayne is such a dominant character and actor on screen, even just physically, that it's very hard to score a scene that isn't from his perspective, especially, he's the hero of his films, right?
Right.
So to look at this differently and almost as if all of his heroics, the audience and the world and the heavens already recognizes they are in vain, but he doesn't yet. It made the scene so much more tragic that we could tell that what he was doing would not end well, and it was almost written in the stars what would happen.
Wow. And you've got, for the rest of the film, you've got this massive, massive orchestra that you're tracking separately. Nicholas Dodd even came up with a unique brass configuration for you. And one of the things that I would find challenging about working on these big, blockbuster movies that are action sequence intense, like San Andreas, like Rampage, would be to deal with the amount of sound design and other elements in the movie. There's sort of a latitude as a max amount of information on the screen at any given point. Something has to give. How do you approach writing action sequences and writing music like that, which is often dense, heavy, or whatever? I'm not sure what the approach is necessarily, but how do you deal with those elements? How do you figure out how to make them work effectively together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, no matter how hard you try, there are always going to be times you show up at the dub and the music and the sound effects don't work together. Like something's got to give. That's when you end up with people pulling stems out of the sound effects or stems out of the music. And I absolutely hate the prospect of that, having something get dissected, in the final recital, get something torn apart. So I'm always getting in touch with the sound team And, even Journey, I mean, they were different sound teams, but on Journey 2, it's funny, Al Nelson was with Skywalker Sound, and they did the Journey, second Journey film. And he and I were working together the whole time, to the point even that there was a night, just one last story of Papua New Guinea. There's a night I went up to use the washroom and go up the hill, and I couldn't see anything. And so I brought my recorder, and I used the light on the recorder. And of course, I'm sitting there with it on, and as I'm getting back to go back to the hut, and the mosquitoes are like smoke thick, like they're so thick. But I'm realizing, wow, listen to this. This is amazing how it sounds. So I sat the recorder there, and I just sat and tried to cover up any bare skin I could. And I just sat there for about 3 or 4 minutes, just recorded the sound of the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and brought it back and said, hey, and Al had given me a couple of sounds to kind of work with, and said, here's this back at you. And since then, he's like, we used it on Jurassic World, and we used it on this, and they've been able to extract sounds from that 4-minute recording and use it on all these different things. But anyways, so basically, to answer your question, it's really important to know what the left hand, if you're the right hand, know what the left hand is doing before you get to the dub. And there's a lot of ways that I'm able to do stuff that really helps sound effects. Like, if there's a big battle scene, car crashes and gunfights and things like that, obviously a big percussion that sounds like car crashes and gun shots is not going to help anybody. So it's finding a way to work together to make that work. And on San Andreas, it was one of the most successful experiences I've had. Per Hallberg, who also a great friend, super talented sound designer and team, he and I worked together constantly, even figuring out how to pitch the sound of metal bending to match the score, and how the score, what frequencies the score needed to stay out of. Obviously earthquakes, a lot of low end stuff. So in those moments, I'd go high, and we got to the dub, and it was a dream. And,
that's great! Wow.
And we got to do it again on Rampage, and we're doing it again on Brad's next movie. So it's been great.
So you're saying that you were breaking the piano, and with your creative partner Michael White, who's a synthesist, you were doing some manipulations of the orchestra, and there was this whole process you guys were developing. But you ended up saying that was just scratching the surface. You're doing all this work, you're working for so long, and that's where you're at. What does this mean for you going forward? And I think you've talked about that in some other recent works. I think The Space Between Us, you said that too at the end. You're like, this is going to change the way I work going forward. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think going back to finding the music in either the instruments or in the world, finding the musical moments that you can kind of learn from and build on. I mean, looking at music in a way differently than the Western music education that we learn about in 4/4 or 6/8, or, kind of instead trying to find, I guess Space Between Us was a good example. And Mike and I have worked together a bunch of times. We've co-composed some things as well. He's a brilliant composer, but just all around amazing musician and musical mind. And, even things he's not working on, I'm always saying, hey, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this idea? And, always bouncing things off of him that way. I mean, Neil's the same. I'm really lucky to work with those guys. They're huge assets to what I do, and makes it so much fun. But yeah, really it was just trying to not round the instruments and the sound sources into what we're used to, but instead try to live within the world that they give you. And I think Space Between Us was, San Andreas, it definitely just touched upon it with the broken piano, but there wasn't a lot of places to play quarter tone piano notes on a San Andreas score. But definitely I took that idea into Space Between Us shortly thereafter. And even from that point on, really, a lot of times before that, I would start writing on piano or guitar or in my head and manuscript and orchestra. And after that, I try to sit down a lot of times with an instrument I don't totally know my way around, and try to create music out of that, and then go from that direction into my knowledge and my understanding of orchestration and other things. So just trying to make the genesis of the ideas something new each time. And I guess it's an extension of what Mychael said, getting into the trenches and trying to work your way out, getting into an unfamiliar place and use what you have to try to work your way out of it.
So when we're going back to sort of look at your trajectory, you've got St. Ralph, which gets you Skinwalker. So you're going from a family film to a horror movie. Then you're going from a horror movie to Journey, which is an adventure film, and then into Ember. It's just amazing to me the jumps you've made and the way that you're able to inhabit all these different genres, which I think is the natural order of things, if there could be such a thing within our industry. But the cliche, or at least the way it seems to go, is you become known for something, and then that's what your phone is ringing for all the time. You're known, you can do this one thing. You become the comedy composer, you could become the horror composer, you become the adventure composer. And somehow you've managed to avoid that. Is there a strategy you're employing? Do you think that there's something that people see in you that just sort of puts you in a different position? How have you managed to do that?
Well, I was conscious for a long time of not, certainly after the Journey films and Percy Jackson, City of Ember, sort of the sci-fi family movie was definitely, that was a lot of the calls I was getting. And I love that genre. I love working in it. But to me, there's a challenge in trying to figure out how to reinvent yourself so many times. Like if I ask you to write a Beatles type song, in that style, I'm sure you do an amazing job of it, and then say, okay, give me 10 more exactly like that. And very quickly you run out of ideas, and you run out of ways of making each of those original from each other. So that part was conscious. But prior to doing Journey, I was working with Mina Shum and Ian Iqbal Rashid. I was doing a lot of indie film festival like films, and I kept those relationships and kept working on those kinds of films. And so I think I never kind of abandoned that. I always tried to do that, and certainly the bigger studio films informed how I wrote those films, and vice versa. I was learning on every project, and Skinwalkers is an interesting example because, as I mentioned, I wasn't super excited about that prospect of doing that. But when I got into it and realized, really this is about a father and a mother protecting their child, and I'm scoring that. If I score that idea of it and not the monsters and the werewolves and the then it's a film I totally relate to, and I can totally do that and totally understand how I would do that. So that was a bit of a lesson to me in finding, in everything you do, find the part of it that speaks to you. And I think just naturally you end up, all genres, all types, all storylines have something you can relate to. So it's kind of taking that seed and running with it. One really good thing is, I think in recent years, people don't want you to do exactly the same. Like it's actually fantastic. Like all composers, I think, are being asked to do something creative, and the scores that are being recognized at awards and by critics and by fellow composers, the scores I love are scores that do something I haven't heard before. So, so I think people are not just getting hired because they've temped their movie with their old score. I think they're recognizing, hey, this person's creative, and I want them to do something different than they've done before and different than I've heard before. So I actually think it's going in a great direction, and I think it's getting to a point where we're going to see a lot more of that, of people working in all different genres. And I think art in general, music and film and storytelling, will be better for it.
So speaking of awards and recognition, you were nominated for a CSA in 2020 for Kindness of Strangers. And that was with German director Lona Schaffig, and she's a Dogma 95 adherent.
Yeah, so she's Danish, a Danish director. Yeah.
Okay.
Although she speaks fluent German, so it's interesting. She speaks like 5 or 6 languages, and she speaks English better than me. So,
wow.
I think she is. That's an easy mistake to make. She's quite fluent.
Was she a challenging director to work for? I mean, I imagine that like there's a kind of, well, in the name suggests a dogma, like this very hard-nosed kind of way of approaching filmmaking, and strict rules, and a kind of like this destination that they all seem to be going towards. I would imagine it wouldn't necessarily make for the most easygoing of director-composer relationships. What was it like working with her?
It's really funny. So she is really seen as one of the creators of that whole movement in her filmmaking, but we never talked about that. Like I think we were so focused on the actual story at hand. It was one of those situations. The movie had been in post for a long time. They had, I think, tried a bunch of other things in the music with another composer that hadn't worked out for one reason or another. It's never the composer. It's never a talent thing. I think, and having been on both sides of this, I think you get a composer gets on something, and they're part of the process of elimination, of figuring out what doesn't work. And you go down that road so many times, and the project becomes stale. And so I was brought in and I had the fortunate thing of being brought in like a month before they had to final. So it was very quick.
Right.
She was lovely to work with, and really, really talented storyteller. And thinking of, my favorite directors you're having conversations about the story, not about what the music's doing. So they're explaining to you the elements of the story that aren't on the screen, that the music has a final opportunity to make connections and put things together. Like, one of the things I love about a score, and she thinks this way, is the idea that two characters who will never share screen time can have a connection that can be united by a theme or by music. And so we talked a lot about that, and I loved working on that score. And there's so many different ways that film could have been scored, but the way we ultimately did it was to use this like there's a scene in the film where there's a concert hall, like Carnegie Hall, I think it's unofficially supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And the characters at more than one moment are listening to the music emanating from outside the hall and sort of scoring their life with that music. And when I was brought on, that was it was Strauss, it was all these different classical pieces. And she and I talked about it, and we kind of thought, it's too bad these can't be their themes, because in their head, it's their themes. It's like if you're mountain biking down a hill and listening to the Rocky theme in your head, that's your theme. That's the theme of you mountain biking. So right. I think for them, they're listening to this concert music and saying, this is the life I strive for. This is describing my emotional thing. So Lona and I kind of reverse engineered it. And the first thing we did was, let's write a piece of concert music that fits the venue, feels like it deserves to be there. Our audience will hopefully say, what is that piece? That sounds like it's Strauss, or it sounds like it's something. What is it? And then reverse and be able to have license to use that theme in all these other different ways, even prior to that. Like, even use that theme in a very minimalist way before they get to that scene, or the multiple scenes like that. So that was really fun to be able to have license to score that kind of emotional program music with a big orchestra and piano and harps. And I really enjoyed that process. And some directors, you get to the recording session and they're sort of quiet and say, oh, this is great, or more this or more that. She was coming up with a list of notes that Andrew Dudman, my engineer, and I would have too. And she'd have other ones we didn't have. Like her, in addition to knowing so many different actual languages, her understanding of music and the language of music was also equally impressive.
A true polymath. And in this case, not something that gets in the way of the process where people think they know what they're talking about and just sort of gums up the works. You were also telling me, or I think you actually said this in an interview, that you were able to communicate with her about what the score was going to be based purely on your piano performances as opposed to mock-ups. And something that you said was that you feel that mock-ups are starting to hurt our imagination.
Yeah, and the way I mean that is, if someone shows you a charcoal sketch of you, you can look at it and go, oh wow, I can. Your brain kind of makes up the difference. Your brain takes that charcoal sketch and sees a painting or sees a personality, sees a person. But if somebody shows you a very good painting that's 90% there and way further than that charcoal sketch, then that painting has filled in so many of the gaps that you would have done correctly in your brain, but maybe it has so many more opportunities for a misstep. So I think that when you sit there and you play a theme to someone on the piano and you say, this is going to be this instrument and this is going to be this instrument, and then here's a big build and boom, that's how it used to be done. And I think a director or a producer or a storyteller can hear that and go, I know that's going to sound. But mock-ups nowadays do so much of that it takes away that imagination. Brad and I have talked about this a lot, because I'll play a mock-up or a thing on the piano for Brad sometimes, or I'll hum something to him, and he'll say, I just hear you humming. I just hear the piano. I don't know what you're talking about. I believe you, but I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. And then he'll say, oh, we're going to do a new scene. Here, I've put it into the cut. And in the middle of, a big action movie, suddenly there's hand-drawn stills with arrows saying, person walks over here, and then person does this. And he's like, yeah, you see that scene, can you score it? I'm like, no, I see paper with drawings on it with arrows. I don't see the movie. So I think that's an example of how he's learned to take that imagination and he can turn that into a movie, but he can sell the idea on drawings and stills. And
right.
And I feel the same way about kind of at the piano. And I think one of the mock-ups are amazing now. And I've actually had a point where I've gone in and recorded with a real orchestra, with a great orchestra in London. And the director's kind of gone, oh, I kind of like your mock-up. I'm kind of used to your MIDI mock-up. And you realize they're so good and they're perfect for one thing, or perfect for what they were recorded to do. But they also can only do that. So you're kind of, if you have a string patch that has a slow attack or it has a certain envelope to it, you're going to write something that sounds great with that string patch. Mm-hmm. But whether that envelope is bigger or smaller, or it has moments of sforzando or whatever, you're not necessarily going to do that because the patch is steering you in a certain direction. So Neil and I joke about it all the time. I've got this patch that I actually was turned on to by Mychael Danna in the 90s. And even then, I think this old Roland string sound was probably 7 or 8 years old. I still write with this string. And it's not because it sounds more realistic than anything else out there, because it doesn't. But it is so middle of the road. This patch will work for some. From that patch, I can imagine how the orchestra will take it in one direction or the other, but it only has to go 30 or 40% in any different direction from that sound. It's right in the middle. And it motivates me to write what's in my head instead of what the samples are kind of leading me to write.
Sure. Do you think that the way that a lot of scores now sound is a result of the mock-up becoming what it is and samples becoming so widely used, as opposed to, if you read the old orchestration manuals, like the really old ones, they'll advise students to go and sit in the orchestra or sit in rehearsal and read the score so they can hear what they're seeing and then be able to use that for their imagination later on. They had no references other than the piano. Now we can hear, quote unquote, what the final result is, but it also kind of lies to you. and it does sort of hem you in. Do you feel like scores these days sound the way they do because of the mock-up?
I think there are certain scores that do. I think I still think it's a really useful tool because I still have to mock things up and do it as well. I think for me, in wanting to push the envelope, and I think most people wanting to be different and be creative and be unique, it just puts a responsibility on you to think outside of that and try to not just say that, like I guess what I'm saying is now I'll do better mock-ups, but if I'm playing it for a director, I'm always saying it's not going to be exactly like this. Like there's going to be a portamento between these strings, and I'm not going to do a pitch bend to try to mock it up because it's going to sound stupid. So I'm still trying to say, hey, keep an imagination, and I'm trying myself to keep an imagination so that you can still create something on the recording room floor, and it's not just a facsimile of what you've already done in your computer.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. I like that balance of those things. In order to sort of inspire yourself and get into the mode of the film, you read scripts, you even go and visit film sets, you allow the certain actors' perspectives to sort of inform where the score is going. And then an interesting quote that I read was, you said, it's important to protect your life experiences so you can relate to the experiences of the characters you're scoring. What do you mean by protect your life experiences?
Well, I think we all know, and in this industry of film and television, it's really easy to spend 26 hours a day working on it. You're never done. Like you never go, that's perfect. There's nothing else to do. You're always kind of at a time, and hopefully you've reached a point where you're really happy with it. But you could work all of the time. Tell me any time, Adrian, where you've been given 2 months to write a score and 3 weeks before you're like, I'm done. I'm just done. I'm gonna go on a bike ride and go on vacation. It never happens. So I think for me, it's a bit of a conscious effort. I mean, I've had times where I've been in LA for 6 months, working 7 days a week, sometimes 20 hours a day on a film. Like you're just always going, and you can't sleep because you get on this creative treadmill where you're just rolling with ideas, and you just want to keep going while you're prolific, right? But I find you have to step away, and it's important to make sure that what you're drawing upon in terms of your emotions and your experience and the way you relate to the characters, you have something to relate to them with. And just only working in the film industry, only scoring a film for 6 months, you aren't close to those emotions or those relationships or those experiences that would give you that creative inspiration.
I think that's incredibly important, incredibly wise counsel. The idea that you have a creative well at all to draw from, that you read books, that you study, things other than music and other than film and television, that you listen to music beyond scores, all of these things. You go and travel and do these things so that when you do have to relate to someone on the screen, you have something to draw from, as opposed to, well, I've got all these other things I've seen on other shows and TV series or on films, which kind of starts to become a self-replicating process. So what do you do when you're not scoring films? What do you do for fun? What do you do to enrich yourself? How do you fill the well?
Well, before I answer that, one example I'll give you, a funny thing, is that you tend to think of things as being working or playing or filling the well or drawing from the well.
Sure.
And 2 days ago, it's funny, I always give myself a list, and I say, I want to write these cues, or I want to arrange this, or I want to create this sound. Give myself a list of things to do. And my daughter was home. I was spending time with her. I had a doctor's appointment. I get home and the soccer's on TV, and I kind of get roped into the soccer, and I realized I let the whole day go and I just haven't done anything I needed to do. And of course there's that guilt and that shame and that realization that now I'm gonna have to figure out tomorrow how to try to make up some of the ground. And so here I think I guess I'm filling the well that I'm gonna draw upon. But all the while, I wake up the next morning at 3 a.m. with all of the answers to the things that I would have spent the day figuring out. So I sat down, and in 2 hours I wrote all the cues, got them all mapped out, that it only took me 2 hours instead of the 12 I'd imagined it would. So just to finish that point, I think that a lot of the times that you think that you're not working, your brain is still working on it. You're still kind of solving problems and either getting a different perspective or, I feel like even when I'm writing melodies, my brain is often going, okay, I love the first 5 notes. What's the 6th note? And then, no, that doesn't work. No, that doesn't work. No, that, oh, maybe that, no, that. Like, I feel like it's often doing that kind of behind the scenes. So that's kind of an example of even when you're not working, I think your brain is still making progress.
I don't think that can be overstated. And it's these simple little, axioms, which is, sleep on it, which seems you sort of don't, it's like writing on a wall that you see every day, you kind of ignore it after a while, but you go back to something like this and realize what the power in those words. And I think you just perfectly described it, sleeping on it. Instead of pushing yourself for 20 hours to try and solve something by brute force, to allow the subconscious to do that mysterious job that it does when you go to bed or when you completely distract yourself with something else and you come back and you wonder why you were worried about this problem in the first place. It seems so obvious and so simple, or I'll hear something on the radio at some point because I've gone to a cafe, back when we could, and you go, oh, that thing, but the inverse of that. Like if I reverse the polarity of that baseline, I've got the solution to this weird problem that I was having. This always happens. So, I mean, to me, I think part of what you're driving at probably too is this idea that, work for the sake of work or some sort of weird Protestant work ethic where you just have to destroy yourself and feel finished and completely exhausted isn't always the answer.
Yeah, and sometimes it is, though. I've had, there are days, if you don't have that day, then there's days you have to just push through that 12 hours and figure out how to make it work. But I find that as important. And the other interesting thing, I used to wake up in the middle of the night with the solution to everything and think, okay, I've got it. I know exactly what that theme is. I know how to do it. I'm going to remember this. And when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to go into the studio and you wake up in the morning and you're like, what was that again? So what's funny is now I literally get up and I go and do it and I record it. Yeah. And in the morning, I either wake up and go, wow, thank God I did that. That's exactly what I needed. Or I go, okay, what drugs was I on last night that I thought this was even worth waking up and getting out of bed to dictate or to play. So but all of the, I think your brain's always working on it. My wife will say to me, she'll be talking to me and she'll go, oh yeah, you're writing music in your head right now. Like we'll be out doing something and she's like, oh yeah, I know you're not really here.
Yeah. You're not fully present.
But so in terms, family's a big influence for me. And we have a place up north where I am now where just even getting, and I think I got into this in LA with all the walking and hiking, but I'll put on my headphones what I wrote the day before. And I'll just listen through all my sketches or theme ideas as I'm walking and have a chance to really reflect on it and not be distracted from it. Yeah. So, that's more of a literal kind of building the well, but I find getting out and doing things and having music kind of being in your subconscious, it makes a big difference. It's progress.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any things that you want to sort of say, a message for people about yourself as a composer, the industry, or anything else that you want to get out there?
Yeah, the only, probably the best advice I could give anybody, both, and I take it myself every day, is that you hear when people are having fun. You can tell when someone loves what they do because you see it, you hear it, and we can't always be doing that all of the time, and maybe you're trying to fake it sometimes in every job, in every industry. But I certainly, this project I'm working on right now, I'm really loving working on it. And I feel like it's reflected in my work ethic. It's reflected in how people respond better to stuff that I've really loved doing. So if I'm ever at a fork in the road, and I say this to my artist friends too, go to the one that you enjoy the most, because it is, even if it's a stretch from what people are expecting or what they've requested from you, there's a magic to that, like we've talked about, that you can't really define. It's sort of that magic variable that more often than not will win.
I love that. Yeah, that's extremely important. When you know that you're doing something that, I guess, to put it simply, just resonates with you at some deep level, as opposed to something, well, I could do this, or this is the pragmatic thing to do, to follow that trail, even if it's for a time. I find that's been really important for me lately, is to go after artistic projects, or even just stuff for myself, and just go, shut everything else off. Don't listen to the voice in your head or on wherever else, and you think, is this cool? Is this good? Is this bad? No, none of that. And just write to the core of who you are, essentially, and try and bring that stuff out. That to me has been a real revelation lately. So I think that's really, really good advice.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, every bit of advice I've ever given works about 50% of the time. So yeah. But you know, I think it all again goes back to finding the things that will be the catalyst to make you creative, and and loving what you do is, I mean, that's why we all started doing this. So it's important to figure out a way to work that into the equation.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it. So what are you working on now that you can talk about, that you're excited about?
Yeah, so two things. One, I touched on a movie, Atlas, with Brad Payton, which I think is our 7th or 8th, maybe.
Wow, amazing.
More. We've done a lot of projects, and again, it's very different than anything we've done before. Another example, actually, where I was able to go to, he and I, before the pandemic, went to Japan and did some recording there. Again, the same idea of what had stemmed from that early Papua New Guinea trip. So research, it's a really exciting one. Jennifer Lopez, sci-fi kind of space.
Oh, cool.
Film, but really intellectual, original story. So very excited about that. And then working with Taylor Sheridan on a series called Mayor of Kingstown, Jeremy Renner and Diane Weiss. Amazing series. And it's one of those moments, you go back and forth between film and series. It's funny, there's a director that said to me, it's not a TV series, it's a series. Like there's not a defining line between those two storytelling mediums anymore. And one of the best things about this one is sometimes you write themes and you only have an hour and a half or 2 hours in their whole life that they'll ever exist. So you're writing variations on them, and you're having to kind of put things in the trash bin that you actually think are worthy, but there's just no space for them. So to have a full 10-hour series, to really think of it as a 10-hour movie and have these themes introduced and follow their evolution through the story, and be able to do all those little tangents and side roads and everything and lookouts along the way. I'm loving it. Yeah, it's great.
Just to jump into that for a second, because I love that description of it. And then I think immediately, how would you keep track of all that stuff? How do you organize all the tangents, all the side roads, all the themes, all the sub-themes, the variations, and everything you're doing, what's appropriate for what, and who belongs to, or what belongs to who, and what belongs to what idea? Do you have a system for that?
I have markers of different colors and shapes, and I literally write out on a clipboard, a piece of paper. Like I have my themes written out and what they relate to, what relationships they relate to. I always prefer, if possible, that a theme is a relationship or a subtext of a story and not just a character. Right. Where sometimes, it's appropriate that it's a character, but I've always kind of thought in Peter and the Wolf, when Peter shows up or the wolf shows up, the music is completely married to that visual. Whereas the music could say something different than the visual is saying. So where it's possible, where the score can tell a piece of the story that the visuals can't, or it can tell another layer of the story or a parallel way of telling the story, I think that's preferable for me, and that's certainly what I try to do. So I'll write out on a piece of paper, and I even do shapes. Like I have like a flow chart where I'll list all of the cues. And I always put, is it a triangle? Is it a circle? Is it a diamond? Is it a square? Like I'll give, or a color to each of the themes, so I can kind of sit back and look at it and go, oh, wow, I've just done 4 triangles in a row. I shouldn't do that. Is there any way I can do a star here? Or, and also a lot of the themes end up being sub-themes of another, like a B section of another theme, or, so I'm sometimes trying to relate the themes. And in a perfect world, you might have 2 themes that start out in completely different areas, but end up by the end of the film having a relationship to each other. So if there's a way for both of those themes to coexist over kind of interwoven, then you want to keep track of that as well. So that's I really use that idea of trying to write it out. And even, it's funny, I think I have this book, it's just manuscript. And I just, over the years, I just write all my little theme ideas in there, and I'll have it in front of me as I'm kind of going through. And sometimes looking at the notes on the page, you kind of go, oh, I should try the inverse, or I'll try it backwards, or I'll try the retrograde. And just, instead of doing it by memory, just looking at it, and it kind of triggers a different variation or a different kind of tangent as we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the evolution of the finished creature, but it can be a little sidetrack,
I love that idea of shapes and being able to visually see redundancies or something like that. Do you, and in terms of dynamics over a long period of time, like there's a sort of dynamic arc of an entire film in terms of the narrative. In acting, there's this idea of like, what level were you at? Okay, you're coming out of this scene, you're shooting a completely different day. You have to remember where you were emotionally to be able to track that, so that when it all gets cut together, you aren't going from a 5 to an 8 on the next cut, because then you're just mixed. You're not matched emotionally. Do you have a way of tracking emotional peaks and valleys and where you want to hit your apex through the course of the entire thing on a timeline?
I guess subconsciously I do. Although when I'm theme writing, and this is often my presentation to a director with a theme, I'll kind of play them a theme, and I'll play it to them 2 or 3 different ways. I'll say, okay, this is how I see it introduced. This is the foundation of their story. Here it is sort of midway through the story when they're at this point. Here's where it gets to if we really want the payoff and the emotion and the audience to have internalized that motif or that melody, and then to really use it to its full effectiveness. This is where it is. So in doing that, I'm always referencing a theme or a moment in the story. Like, when the character finally overcomes this is the culmination of the climax of this theme. So just by default, I'm sort of putting dots on the graph of the emotional arc of that. And I'm also sort of roughly scoring those themes and already sort of making a declaration and planting a flag and saying, this will be this. And the director, he or she, will have to kind of buy into that and say, yeah, I agree. So the great thing is, by the time you get there, they're already in it. Like, you've sold them. Like, I always feel like with this process, when you play reels 3 to 6 on a film for the director, that's fun. Those are fun sessions, because you've already told them what the roadmap is. They know where it's going, and then they've bought into and internalized the first 2 reels of the theme. So you're sort of over the hump at that point. But yeah, for me, it helps me kind of keep track of the arc. And, someone once said to me, every scene can be an Oscar clip. Like, if you had a 2-minute scene from a film, you would, if that's the 2 minutes they're playing in the Oscars about that movie, you're going to score it totally differently. But you can't score a whole film with that kind of emotional veil lifted. You have to be restrained and choose your moment. So, I find going back to it, I find actually writing it out and the visual of it really helpful, and amazing how many times, like, for example, on Mayor of Kingstown, there's this theme right now that, as I'm working on it, I'm realizing this works under everything. Like, this motif, this melody, it works really well everywhere. And suddenly I'm sitting there and I think it's represented by a triangle on my sheet. I'm like, okay, I need 3 triangles, and I need a way to differentiate this so that I can kind of, by mitosis, break it apart and give it a slightly different message. So yeah, it's helpful.
Wow. What a cool process. Thanks for sharing that. Well, Andrew, this has been absolutely brilliant. I've enjoyed this conversation so much. I feel like we could go on for hours and hours, but we have to end it somewhere. I can't thank you enough for this, the incredible insights and the wonderful stories. I think your work is absolutely brilliant, and you're one of the most humble and down-to-earth people I've ever met, never mind in the film world. And I have to imagine that's part of your success, in addition to your incredible talent. So thanks again so much for spending the time and everything you've shared with us today. And yeah, wishing you all the best in the future. Can't wait for the new stuff to come out.
Awesome. Well, right back at you, Adrian. And great chatting with you. Both here and prior, before we did this. It was great chatting with you. Beautiful. And hopefully we can get together and actually share maybe a pint or two once all this has come to a close. From your lips to God's ears. Please. Yeah, we're all in our household, as I know with you. We're anxiously awaiting some sense of normalcy again. Well, it looks like the light at the end of the tunnel anyway, so fingers crossed. Yeah. Andrew, thanks again. Have a great rest of the day. Same to you. Thanks, Adrian. Cheers. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.